stand historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with the Global Alert News Hour for Saturday, July 9th, 2016. This show is broadcast on KQMS throughout Northern California, Saturday mornings, 6 to 7 a.m. A recording of the show can be found on the KQMS news site and GeoEngineeringWatch.org. This is a commercial-free news hour paid for by GeoEngineeringWatch.org so that we have no outside influence from any sponsors. We can cover stories that most are not covering. We can connect dots that most are not connecting. The paradigm of the military-industrial pharmaceutical complex, lies and deception, continues to spiral completely out of control along with the rapidly disintegrating biosphere and climate system. All the while, populations of industrialized nations, especially the United States, are still largely asleep at the wheel. This needs to change if we're to have anything left to salvage. The storm is not coming, it's here. It's unfolding now on countless fronts. On a local note, Vaxxed, From Cover-Up to Catastrophe, the essential film to see for anyone who cares at all about their children or any children, has been extended for a third week at the Anderson Valley 11 theaters. This is a must-see film, again, for every parent, healthcare provider, every human being that has any regard for the future of our children. Please see this film. Once you have, if you want to speak to the physicians in the film, the producers and researchers from the film, there will be an event August 5th at the Cascade Theater. This is an all-day event. If you wish to personally meet the producers of this film and the physicians in it, as well as former CIA officer Kevin Shipp, a decorated CIA officer, anti-terrorism specialist, who wrote the book From the Company of Shadows, will also be there to give presentations and discuss with the public exactly what the government does to anyone who tries to tell the truth about the covert criminal actions that are going on within the ranks of our government. We have the horse's mouth in Reading and on these dire topics. If you care about the truth, show up. It's a free event, paid for out of pocket, again, by GeoEngineeringWatch.org, so we can simply try to get the truth out to all those that are willing to face it. And so many are unfortunately unwilling to face harsh and unpleasant truths. But if we don't face such truths, how can we look ourselves in the mirror? How can we look our children in the eyes? And how can we have any chance of changing the current paradigm for the better? On that theme, a quote from Albert Einstein: "He who joyfully marches to the music in rank and file has already earned my contempt. He's been given a large brain by mistake, since for him the spinal cord would suffice." Something to consider from Albert Einstein. It's imperative for us to exercise our sense of reason, our sense of justice, our sense of honor, our sense of virtue. And this can't be done by hiding from the truth, period. Another important quote to consider on this theme: "The cult of omnipotent state has millions of followers in the United States. Americans of today view their government in the same way as the spiritual view their God. They worship and adore the state, and they render their lives and fortunes to it." From Jacob Hornberger. Consider that. How many Americans blindly follow the official narrative of their government without question? Is that really honorable? Is that really patriotic? Covered that in last week's show. That's the ultimate form of tyranny, to blindly follow the dictates of the state. This paradigm has to change. False flag attacks and systematic assaults on our own population are business as usual for the criminal cabal that pulls the strings of our so-called government. And I'm not stating governments around the world are not corrupt. They are. But they're in direct proportion to the size of their militaries. Who has the largest military on the planet? By about 10 times over. Consider that. How many false flag events are there that have occurred in recent history, too many to count. But for the record, let's quickly go over a few of the most glaring ones, since the US and NATO are now using the same models to try and fuel World War III. We are on the brink of total global cataclysm from countless fronts, and those in power are almost out of options, and they're pushing toward global conflict right now. So I want to briefly go over some historical facts that Americans seem to have forgotten, that false flags are business as usual for the global power structure. The Spanish-American War, 1998, the surprise explosion of the battleship Maine in Havana, Cuba. 255 of the crew died. The Hearst Press accused the Spanish, claiming that the explosion was caused by a remote-controlled mine. The USA declared war on Spain and conquered the Philippines, Guam, and Cuba. Subsequent investigations revealed that the explosion originated inside the Maine, and that it was either an accident, such as a coal explosion, or some type of bomb inside the battleship. Divers investigating the shipwreck found that the armor plates of the ship were blown, bending outwards. False flag event used as an excuse to invade and conquer other countries. World War I. U-boat torpedoed the ocean liner Lusitania near Britain. Some 1,200 people, including 128 Americans on board, lost their lives. Subsequent investigations revealed that a major explosion happened inside the Lusitania as it was secretly transporting 6 million pounds of artillery shells and rifle ammunition, as well as other explosives, on behalf of Morgan banking corporations to help their clients. This was used as a pretext for World War I. World War II. How many are already aware that the U.S. government knew about the attack coming on Pearl Harbor? Excerpt from a report. Having broken Japanese encryption codes, the Americans knew what was going to happen, when and where, but the president did not dispatch this information to Pearl Harbor. Americans even gave their friends, the British, 3 decrypting machines which automatically open encrypted Japanese military traffic, but this same information was not available to the commanders of Hawaii. The movement of the fleet, Japanese fleet, was also visible in the very effective radio direction finding network. Japan had an alliance with Germany, and the Germans upheld their promise by declaring war against the USA right after the Japanese declaration. History that too many have forgotten already. The Korean War. South Korean incursions into North Korea led to contrary claims and into war. The cause of this war was covert action involving the leaders of Taiwan, South Korea, and the U.S. military-industrial complex. No surprise. Again, business as usual. The Vietnam War. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, where an American destroyer, the Maddox, was supposedly attacked twice by 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats in 1964. The Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. False flag event. Nearly 60,000 of our sons, daughters, mothers, and fathers killed. Millions of foreign civilians killed from a false flag event. Indisputed history. The Panama invasion. The incident between American and Panamanian troops led to invasion. The leader, Noriega, was changed, and the earlier Carter administration plan to hand control of the canal over to Panama was canceled. Objectives carried out. Business as usual. Desert Storm, the first Gulf War. Saddam Hussein asked for permission from the U.S. via their ambassador, April Gillespie, and got an answer that the U.S. does not care about Arab quarrels. That was a trap. And after Saddam occupied Kuwait, George Bush Sr. mobilized a coalition of some 40 nations to, quote, liberate Kuwait and to smash the recently built Iraqi military power base. This also involved media hoaxes where, in one case, the daughter of a Kuwaiti U.S. ambassador played a nurse on TV and testified to, quote, witnessing Iraqi soldiers throwing babies out of incubators. Complete fabrication, historically proven, and yet the American population is still oblivious to this type of false flag theater that's used for the benefit of the military-industrial complex. Next, Operation Enduring Freedom, the Afghanistan invasion in 2001. Without any evidence whatsoever, the former CIA asset, Saudi Arabian Osama bin Laden, was claimed to be the mastermind behind the 9/11 strikes at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. So we're to believe that a diabetic hiding in caves in Afghanistan somehow outwitted, outmaneuvered the largest, most powerful, most sophisticated military on the planet. Are we really to believe this? And what about Building 7 of the World Trade Center that collapsed to the ground in 7 seconds at free fall speed, never got hit by anything, and this has been the license. 9/11 was the license by which the military-industrial complex unleashed its global policy of invasion and toppling other countries, clamping down on its own citizens. Connect the dots. Connect the dots. In fact, as stated in previous shows, again, a year and a half before the 9/11 incident, the think tank of military-industrial complex warhawks, the Project for a New American Century, PNAC, stated on the record that they needed a, quote, new Pearl Harbor to galvanize the American population to back their policy of invasion and occupation. These dots are not hard to connect for anyone who is willing to look at the facts, period. Now, the second Gulf War, enduring justice, and notice the propagandistic names on all these invasions. This particular invasion was later labeled Operation Iraqi Freedom, and if we all jog our memory, the reason we were given is because Saddam Hussein had WMDs that were a threat to U.S. national security, proven to be completely false, completely fabricated. But how many of the U.S. population still have convinced themselves that Saddam Hussein and Iraq had something to do with 9/11, an event that was clearly a false flag, the license to unleash the military-industrial complex? False flag. All these examples I've given, false flags, over and over and over, and these are only the largest examples. There are many more. What about the other nations that have been toppled recently with U.S. involvement in some way, shape, or form? Libya and Syria being two. What about the U.S. and its allies directly and indirectly supporting the very terrorist organizations that are now claiming responsibility for every increasing terrorist attack, that are the root tools used by those in power to justify clamping down on their own populations, like ISIS? Remember the photographs. John McCain standing with ISIS leaders. Remember U.S. allies like Turkey buying ISIS petroleum stolen from Syria. The list of U.S. support for terrorist groups is long and increasing. The same groups that are then used to program fear into the American population and thus their support for the military-industrial complex. The U.S. and its allies and NATO are now provoking the two other primary global powers, Russia and China, with the already unfolding biosphere collapse and the inevitable and total economic collapse that must follow. Are the U.S. and NATO pushing us toward World War III as their last option in the attempt to maintain total control? All indications confirm this. Again, connect the dots that I just went over. False flag after false flag after false flag. The military-industrial complex is not about to let go of their power. And as the American population begins to be forced to awaken, as the walls close in around them and the paradigm they've known disintegrates, those in power will play every card they have to maintain their control. On that note, on the push toward World War III, Putin states U.S., NATO irreversibly pulling the world toward nuclear war. This is a headline. From this report, Russian President Vladimir Putin, speaking to journalists in St. Petersburg, Russia, said the U.S. and NATO are irreversibly pulling the world to nuclear war and not so subtly hinting it will start when the U.S. missiles can reach a certain range inside Russia. As I've stated in many previous shows, how would the U.S. population react if Russia was setting up missile systems on the U.S. border, and that's exactly what the U.S. is doing to Russia, along with provoking China. Continuing from this report, this terrifying public revelation was made on June 17th, yet the mass media in the U.S. and the West have allowed it to go completely unreported, concealing the hideous danger the U.S. and NATO are causing all of us. Continuing from the report, speaking about the U.S. anti-missile system, which is now being made operational on Russia's border, Putin pointed out that the missiles in that system can travel 500 kilometers. He went on to say that Russia knows precisely how long it takes to overcome the technical challenges of increasing missile range, and that the U.S. knows that Russia knows. Putin went on to say that at some point, those same missiles will be able to reach 1,000 kilometers into Russia, and the moment that takes place, those missiles will be deemed a direct threat to Russian territory, a not-so-subtle line in the sand. Final statements from the report. Putin went on to complain that journalists are told by the U.S. and NATO that these missiles are to protect against a threat from Iran, but there is no threat from Iran. Side note, as I've stated in previous shows, again, in 230 years, Iran has invaded exactly no one. No one. The U.S. has invaded almost 50 countries in the last 50 years, 70 in the last 200 years. Who's the aggressor? Who's the aggressor? Continuing from the report about the U.S. stating Iran is a threat, Putin denying that, of course. So they lied to us again. He went on to say, being Putin, that by concealing these facts from the general public, the people in the U.S. and NATO have no idea of the danger that the U.S. and NATO is getting them into. He lamented, quote, "I don't know how to get through to you anymore," meaning the American people. Report continues, "It seems as though Russia is doing everything it can to shout from the rooftops about the U.S. and NATO dragging us all into what will become a nuclear war, and no one from the mass media in the West is bothering to tell the public. If it comes time for Russia to go to war so as to protect itself from U.S. NATO missiles, they will go to war. And the general public in the U.S. and NATO will be blindsided because no one told them the nefarious actions that are leading up to this fight." Final statement. President Putin is saying in his own words what we report above. This is serious. Our leaders are getting us into severe danger. We, the people, must take steps to stop this. The American population feeds from the public corporate media trough of lies and propaganda, completely oblivious to the long list, which I only gave a few examples of the false flag events that have been used to fuel the military-industrial complex toward a completely out-of-control juggernaut of total insanity, complete insanity. If we don't wake up very, very soon, we will find the planet, in addition to the already unstoppable biosphere collapse, and if we're lucky, if we can change directions in time, we may salvage some of the Earth's life support systems. But if we're going to add nuclear conflict to that, on top of the nuclear volcano already happening in Fukushima, on top of all the other nuclear sites that are already leaking around the globe, that will go into meltdown if grids shut down, which is also an inevitable outcome, we would face more than could possibly be overcome. The planet and life on Earth cannot afford another conflict, and that's exactly where we're headed. And for those who think that the current presidential candidates, either one of them, are going to change business as usual, that's also a delusion. In the case of Hillary Clinton, it's truly unimaginable that such a candidate could even be considered by any rational person. Trump's not far behind. But Clinton and her crimes are so clear and so inarguable, and her incompetence is so glaring. How could any rational person possibly support such a candidate? And how can we possibly have the wife of a former president even allowed? How can she even be allowed to run for president? And we have the son of a former president already having been president, and his brother being allowed to run for president. This is a monarchy. This is a global power cabal that is allowed to run the country. And Clinton is a glaring part of that cabal. And about Trump and those that have placed all their hope in Trump, who supports torture, who supports expanding the military-industrial complex even further, how can that be a step in the right direction? And for any who think that the power structure really deems Trump a threat, wake up. Wake up. If they thought he was a threat, he would already be dead. We're talking about people behind the curtain with so much power that they can demo buildings in front of the World Trade Center. They can bomb the Pentagon, because anybody who's seen a picture of the Pentagon after the airliner supposedly hit it, there's not a single scrap of damaged aircraft outside the Pentagon building. Look up the pictures online and verify what I'm saying. Please don't believe me. Nothing. The Pennsylvania crash site of the other hijacked aircraft, where there's not a scrap of damaged aircraft anywhere at that site. How can such glaring lies be swallowed by the American population? It's astounding. It's truly astounding. But there'll be no hiding from what's unfolding for much longer. The sooner people wake up, the more chance we have to make a meaningful change in direction. So back to the candidates. Any who believe that this pitiful choice we're given is going to make any difference, it's time to wake up. And as far as the recent and increasingly disclosed Clinton crimes, how convenient is it that we have this perhaps orchestrated racial division happening with the 2 black men shot by police and the subsequent shooting of the Dallas police, eclipsing all the damning data about Hillary Clinton, completely eclipsing those headlines, eclipsing all sorts of other headlines around the globe, and fueling division and distraction amongst the population. How incredibly convenient. And this sort of convenient event happens again and again and again and again. It's just simply too convenient. And the suspects in incidents like the Dallas shooting all too often die. A bit like Lee Harvey Oswald was taken out of the picture immediately, so the story can't really be fully investigated and disclosed to the American population. We'll see how these stories unfold, but incredibly convenient timing of so many events again and again and again. So what about our own government and the other nefarious activities it's carrying out? How much longer can they hide, for example, the ongoing and unimaginably obvious climate engineering assault? That's in plain sight for anyone who chooses to exercise their sense of reason and do the slightest bit of objective research. Our skies look like something from another planet, again and again and again. Almost no blue sky. At best we get a silvery white sky, but generally filled with the cobweb, wispy aerosol clouds that are the telltale marker of solar radiation management to fill the sky with toxic reflective aerosol particles. Now, for those who claim, out of total denial, unwillingness to face the truth, unwillingness to investigate, that this is all conspiracy theory, ignoring the 750-page congressional documents, 150 patents, lab tests from all over the globe, every country on the planet talking about climate engineering, and every science institution discussing geoengineering, none admitting that it's obviously going on already. What did CIA Director Brennan say on June 29th at the Council on Foreign Relations? Here's an exact quote from CIA Director Brennan. I'm quoting, "Another example is the array of technologies often referred to collectively as geoengineering that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection." Again, direct quote from Brennan, talking about the dispersion of aerosol particles from jet aircraft in the atmosphere. Exactly what we see happening. Continuing from Brennan's direct quote, "Stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, that's the acronym. A method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way as the volcanic eruptions do." Continuing from Brennan's quote, an SAI, stratospheric aerosol injection program, could limit global temperatures increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. Brennan continues here. The process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. Brennan continues, as promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would raise a number of challenges for our governments and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emissions reductions would still have to accompany SAI, stratospheric aerosol injection, the spraying of particles from jet aircraft, to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Final statement from Brennan. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions at the expense of others could trigger sharp opposition by some nations. Others might seize on SAI's benefits and back away from their commitment to carbon dioxide reductions. And as with other breakthrough technologies, global norms and standards are lacking to guide the deployment and implementation of SAI, stratospheric aerosol injection. Here we have CIA Director Brennan at the Council on Foreign Relations, which is really a core think tank of the power cabal that runs the planet, stating these facts about what we see in our skies, what available evidence proves conclusively is happening in our skies. And Brennan is now having to address this issue in some way, shape, or form because the elephant in the room is becoming all but impossible to hide. And in some sense, he's trying to sell these programs as a benefit, which they are absolutely not. Available data proves that stratospheric aerosol injection is making an already bad climate situation far worse, not better. And why does no one mention that when you spray toxic particles into the atmosphere, obviously they settle down to Earth where they are inhaled by each and every one of us, by our children, where these particles, because they're bioavailable, are absorbed by all life forms, period. We have the lab tests to prove this is happening. So for Brennan to try to start to covertly sell these programs and indicate there may be a few problems, that is a gross misrepresentation of what we know geoengineering to be. Geoengineering, climate engineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, everything that Brennan has just talked about in front of the Council on Foreign Relations is nothing short of an all-out assault against the Earth's life support systems and the entire web of life. This was on C-SPAN, by the way. That's where Brennan made his statement. That's where it was recorded. And anyone can view his statement online. Don't believe me. Please look it up. John Brennan, Geoengineering, C-SPAN. You'll find lots of coverage of what Brennan just stated on the record. Now, how about the weather? Since it's completely going off the rails from every direction, and we have our top U.S. military leader stating on the record that the climate disintegration is the greatest national security threat of all, how's the weather warfare going around the world? Because at this point, we can't really know what natural weather would be like, because the climate system has been disrupted and derailed for over 70 years by global climate modification involving countries around the globe, involved in direct weather warfare, involved in trying to manipulate weather over their own countries. We have a complete disaster, a cataclysm that's unfolding right now. And those who think the climate system isn't damaged are simply living in a delusion. And every day that geoengineering goes on, that damage becomes much more horrific, in addition to all the other forms of anthropogenic damage. What stories aren't we told while we're seeing the sort of media, perhaps orchestrated catastrophes, again with the two black men that have been shot, the police that have tragically been shot, fueling the division, the confusion with the population, back to the weather, back to the covert warfare that's going on that is completely under the radar for most of the global populations. How many saw this story? That we have what has been described as biblical floods in China, with nearly 1.5 million people evacuated this last week. And you can't separate these events from climate engineering. You can't, because the entire system is being derailed. And China's involved as well with climate engineering, as is the US, and we have cataclysms happening everywhere. So how many saw this story? Hundreds dead, 1.5 million evacuated, 2 million rescue workers mobilized, 2 million, 41,000 houses destroyed. How many have seen this story? And this damage report is before a second cyclone is hitting the same area, has hit the same area on Friday. We haven't gotten those damage reports in detail yet. Is this weather warfare? When we know we have countries around the globe manipulating the climate system, all cooperating and collaborating with each other in spite of their conflicts that are being exposed at the surface level, there is a cooperation and a collaboration on climate engineering behind the scenes without question. Because each of these countries has an interest in controlling their own population who would not accept the fact that they are being systematically poisoned with toxic climate engineering fallout, that their weather systems are being disrupted and derailed. No population would accept that. So all of these major powers are covering each other in that regard. And again, with stories as drastic as the one we have coming from China right now, we hear nothing about that in the US. We hear nothing about the massive fires burning around the globe. We hear nothing about the fact that we are headed potentially for an ice-free Arctic at the end of this year or next. We simply see what the media wants us to see, and convenient events seem to happen again and again and again. I didn't go into a lot of specific headlines this week about the continued economic collapse, the continued die-off of so much of the Earth's ecosystems, because I think by now anybody who's paying attention understands that's happening. I want to cover more of the mentality that's going on with the population right now, because we need to face this. Again, I would ask, why do we hear virtually nothing about so many unfolding climate disintegration cataclysms that are occurring all over the globe with rapidly increasing frequency? Unprecedented floods, fires, droughts, crop losses, fish die-offs, dying reefs, eroding shorelines, disappearing ice. As I stated, I could go on and on. How is it that the so-called financial experts, let's ask this question, never mention anything about the imploding biosphere and the fact that this is the bottom line to the now collapsing global economic house of cards? The global economy built on the notion of perpetual expansion on a finite planet with finite resources, complete delusion. That delusion is shattering. Back to the false flag events that are always used when the military-industrial complex finds itself being boxed into a corner, and never more so than right now. The stakes now are higher than ever before in human history, by far, and the danger posed by the power structure, the military-industrial complex, and the pharmaceutical, medical, industrial complex also never more dangerous than right now, and they have never been more desperate than right now. And I want to point out that when people watch certain so-called experts, especially I want to look at economic experts right now, so-called experts, that those who want to cling to the delusion look at and listen to in order to try to force their own particular delusion as to the sustainability of this unsustainable reality. I want to use Jim Rogers. Many look at him as a financial guru, and he was recently on RT TV. And Jim Rogers tried to make the case that, for example, all the refugees are just immigrants. And a quote from Jim Rogers, the financial so-called guru, he stated this, that these are just immigrants, quote, looking for a better life. Rogers continued by stating that all the, quote, immigrants, which are really refugees, as we know, are a great benefit to the world, as the world needs workers. Really, Mr. Rogers. Workers to do what? To build and sell yet more weapons of mass destruction in order to decimate yet more countries and thus to create even more refugees, or immigrants as he calls them? Let's take a quick look again to remember exactly what's created so many of these refugees, and that's what they are. They're not immigrants in the sense the word is understood. They're refugees. They're fleeing from conditions that are no longer conducive to supporting life. And what's the root cause of that? Let's go back to everything I've already covered in this show. Massive, orchestrated military conflict, the decimation of the biosphere. All of this is connected. Climate engineering has absolutely been a weapon for decades to drought out certain countries, to bring them to their knees. I've gone over this in previous shows. Every single one of the Middle Eastern countries that have been toppled in recent history, every single one, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, all of them, subjected to Iran as well, to record drought, epic record drought. Leaders of these countries stating on the record that they are being droughted out by NATO weather modification programs, NATO pushing us toward World War III, as I stated. So these refugees are fleeing conditions that are no longer conducive to supporting them, supporting their lives and their children's lives. And this all goes back to the military-industrial complex that's completely out of control, and yet we have so-called financial gurus like Jim Rogers that are making statements that are so utterly and totally absurd that we can only consider two possibilities with such statements from people like Jim Rogers. They're either absolutely clueless or they're lying. Those are the only two possibilities. And we have so many in that category. So many. Whether we're talking about so many from academia, climate science community, other science communities that are lying about the severity of what's unfolding on our planet, that are lying about the climate engineering that's occurring over our heads, all people who appear to be caught up in their own self-interest, completely oblivious to the greater good, which is ultimately their greater good as well. They continue to perpetuate the lie that's dished out by the corporate military-industrial complex that has so successfully programmed so many populations around the globe that we have a scenario where we are free-falling into total global extinction, and the majority of the population is virtually clueless because of people like Jim Rogers. So again, Rogers is either completely clueless and all those like him, or a liar. Take your pick. Now, Rogers is a stereotype for those in the financial markets and those that have made their fortunes off of the looting, plundering, and pillaging of the planet and its people. And for the record, I've never owned a single stock, not one. Not in Bechtel Power, as I've been accused of by some who simply want to make things up as they go for their own purposes. Never owned a stock in any company, including Bechtel Power, a company that I once worked for. The stock market has always been used as a tool to keep the population committed to the system, to the powers that print the money and thus have ruled the world, at least so far. But their decades-long Ponzi schemes are now blowing apart. The wheels are coming off as the environmental implosion accelerates and infighting behind the curtains of the power structure escalate. Now, for those who are spreading deception, in the meantime, people like CNN's Wolf Blitzer, and are we to really believe that's his real name, Wolf Blitzer? How propagandistic is that name? And he just stated on the air, again, that the U.S., I just watched Wolf Blitzer this last week state that the U.S. is, quote, the greatest country in the world. I would ask why. Why would he state that? On what basis? Because we have the largest and most powerful military? Because we use the most resources, perhaps? Because our government knowingly injects toxic and dangerous vaccinations into our children and sprays skies all over the globe with toxic metals and chemicals under the guise of solar radiation management programs, which are only making the warming far worse while poisoning the entire planet in the process? Is this what makes our country so great? Mr. Blitzer, former AIPAC lobbyist turned propaganda preacher for corporate media. Yes, there's indeed many good and honorable men and women in the U.S. military. I don't deny that. But if they're truly committed to the virtues I just mentioned, they have an absolute duty to uphold the oaths they have taken to protect the Constitution and their fellow citizens from all threats, foreign and domestic. The juggernaut of insanity known as the government is completely off the rails, as I stated earlier. This is not to say that other governments, again, around the globe are not criminal. But as I stated earlier also, the tyranny and criminality is in direct proportion to the strength of the country in question and the strength of its military. And where does that leave us? The U.S. military industrial complex is the major sponsor in one form or another of most, if not all, major media, along with the complete criminal medical industrial complex. What are the primary commercials on CNN, Weather Channel, Fox, etc.? Boeing, Lockheed Martin, military recruiting, asthma medication. We have COPD commercials, all sorts of respiratory ailment commercials. And often, and this is truly shocking, in the background of some of the allergy and asthma commercials are skies filled with aerosol spray trails. Is that a coincidence? You can look this up. Don't have to believe me. Lots of people have documented this. Is that a message somehow? Because we know that those in power know what they're doing to human health by spraying these toxic aerosols. And how can we possibly live, think about this, how can we live in a society with so many academicians that are focused on the geoengineering issue as a, quote, proposal, with Brennan, CIA director, just talking about climate engineering as a potential solution, not admitting it's happening, but a potential solution. I read all through his quote, and no one mentions, nobody even mentions the fact that anything sprayed into our skies will settle down to the planet where, again, we all inhale it, which is exactly what's happening. So back to the lies about the vaccinations being safe, which we now know they're not, and anyone who chooses to find out the truth can go to the Anderson Valley 11 theaters and watch this film, and then can talk to the physicians, the researchers, the filmmakers themselves for free on August 5th at the Cascade Theater in Reading. How is it that such a massive assault against the planet, the biosphere, the weather systems, and our health can occur with no one from academia mentioning what's happening and why? What kind of a world do we live in? What kind of a Truman Show do we live in? And there won't be any hiding from any of this for much longer. I stress that. And that's why I plead with the members of the U.S. military, without them, without their waking up, the population of the planet has no chance. From many directions, the U.S. military has the power to destroy the planet and life on Earth, as does the Russian military and the Chinese military. But right now, we have the U.S. military and NATO being the primary catalyst pushing the planet toward World War III. And I state emphatically again, this doesn't mean the Chinese government is not corrupt, because they are, same as the Russian government. But the current driving force behind push toward global conflict is the U.S. military and NATO. Now, it's important to remember that the military machine needs a tremendous amount of fossil fuels to keep it moving forward. In fact, the U.S. military, the largest single consumer of fossil fuels on the planet Earth. Back to the invasion of countries, the looting and pillaging of the resources, which I've outlined again and again and again. But that looting and pillaging is not limited to other countries and foreign lands. That decimation of the ecosystems in places like Nigeria, complete decimation, and countries like Iraq and so on, where the landscapes have been completely obliterated by this conflict that comes from the pursuit of resources. So what sleight of hand did the global power structure use to distract populations while they in the fossil fuel industry continued to destroy what's left for example, of life in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, pursuing resources to keep the military-industrial machine moving. So while the spotlight was on offshore drilling, fracking quietly made its way into our oceans. Excerpt from a report. The Gulf of Mexico has been struggling with the pollution from offshore drilling for a long time, a struggle that was dramatically highlighted by the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill 6 years ago. This is a recent headline and report. Continuing from the report, but now it has come to light that the oil industry is conducting offshore fracking in the Gulf, which is even more dangerous than conventional oil drilling. According to the Center for Biological Diversity, the group received copies of more than 1,000 fracking permits from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM is the acronym, following a court order. Under the Obama administration between 2010 and 2014, more than 1,200 permits to frack the Gulf were approved through a largely rubber-stamped process for the Center for Biological Diversity. The EPA, which does not permit offshore drilling, has meanwhile allowed fracking companies to dump their wastewater directly into the ocean with no environmental review and no system of water monitoring. Think about that. The military-industrial complex and those behind it, which ultimately lead back, all roads lead back to the central bankers. Who's behind the aerosol operations in our sky? Central bankers. Who's behind the medical-industrial complex? Central bankers. And they will do anything to keep this machine moving, and they need to have a fully fueled military to enforce their dictates. So the need for fossil fuels is immense, and they will do anything to get at it, invade countries, and destroy what's left of Earth's life support systems. So we have literally trillions of gallons of toxic fracking water being dumped into an already polluted Gulf of Mexico, and nobody has a clue. Nobody has a clue this is even going on. And we have environmental groups, and I use that term with increasing disdain, environmental groups that claim to be helping, that are ignoring the climate engineering, that are ignoring stories like I just read right now, claiming some victory here or there in some small arena that hardly matters compared to the bigger picture, not reporting. Lots of hypocrisy going around. Environmental groups, spiritual institutions that are ignoring all of the unfolding cataclysms. The hypocrisy needs to go, and people need to find, as Einstein said, their spines and start facing the truth. So, what's left of our Gulf of Mexico, what's left of the life in the Gulf of Mexico is being systematically destroyed with 1,200 recently issued fracking permits. Now, is it bad enough that we're dumping water into the Gulf of Mexico? How about pumping toxic, unimaginably poisonous fracking fluids into groundwater reserves in California? Here's a recent headline. California fresh groundwater reserves triple in new assessment. There's more groundwater than they thought. But researchers urge caution in underground disposal of oil waste to protect deep water resources. Caution? They just want us to be careful when we do this? This is where science, people have bought into science as being some end-all be-all of truth. The science community is, in so many cases, being used to simply hide reality from the public. The so-called protection agencies like EPA being used to hide reality from the public. So how could any science researcher just claim that we should be careful about disposing oil waste into our groundwater resources? What sane species would do this? What rational human being would think it's okay to dispose of toxic waste that's 500 plus chemicals, literally, into groundwater wells? And this is happening right now. What's left of the planet is being irreparably poisoned. When I say irreparably, it's not going to recover in any time frame that matters. The damage already done to the climate system for the Earth to reach its former equilibrium based on paleo data, past climate disruption events, would likely take 10 to 20 million years. The planet we've known is done. It's gone. It's not coming back in any time frame that matters. Does that mean we give up? Absolutely not. If we can salvage what's left of the Earth's life support systems, we have a responsibility to do so, a responsibility to the whole, to the greater good, and especially to our children. We owe this to them. And on that note, forgive me if I go into a short rant. I'm accused by many of delivering too dire a message, that it's too heavy a burden to bear, and I can't deny this is the truth. And I don't claim to know exactly the right tack to take in every situation I face regarding the communication of frontline verifiable truths, but I can say that after nearly 15 years of lecturing, I've gone at it from all sides. In regard to the disintegrating climate, which was my first focus before prioritizing climate engineering, the majority of people wanted me to tell them that they just needed to buy some solar panels and perhaps a hybrid car, and everything would go back to normal. That all would be well, but I couldn't say that because it's not true. Everything I said, going back now some 15 plus years, statements I made based on all available data and constant research, is indeed unfolding. And I'm not the only one sounding the alarm, obviously. Many other caring individuals are as well, but the masses still refuse to wake. The vast majority of modern society wants a glossed over truth. They don't want the whole truth. Even with the imminent impact staring them in the face, almost none want to know. Yet if a critical mass of the population would muster the strength and the courage to face the whole truth head on, we might yet alter the equation. We might yet make a quantum leap in the right direction. Will everything somehow work out with industrialized society so that it just keeps going? Short of some sort of divine intervention, the answer is a resounding no. Such a conclusion would be mathematically impossible to support. For the human race to truly evolve, for real change to truly occur, enough of our species must reach a place where they're ready and willing to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Not because they're told if they do the right thing they'll get what they want, or they'll somehow avoid what they fear. Facing what we fear head on is the most liberating process of all. It's the most freeing, the most strengthening, and most importantly of all, fully facing the truth is absolutely the most productive process. Is it possible that we may yet have unimaginably powerful allies which are perhaps waiting for us to choose to face our fears and do the right thing, so to speak? I choose to believe in all possibilities. But either way, under any scenario, it's imperative for us to make the choice again to do the right thing simply and only because it's the right thing to do. Not because we're told we'll get what we want or we'll avoid what we fear if we make the extremely difficult choice to face reality. I so often focus on this image in my mind, a single blade of grass, somehow, beyond all odds, sprouting and reaching for life through a single crack in the middle of an endless concrete jungle. Such scenes are real, and they exist. But how many notice this while they're so incredibly busy in their personal pursuits of pleasure, ignoring the horizon, ignoring the walls that are closing in around us? How many notice that single blade of grass? I always look for such miraculous scenes. How many consider such a miracle for what it is? Life is nothing short of an incomprehensible miracle. Life wants to live, and it will, if we choose to give it any opportunity at all. The human race must be willing to face the fact that on the current course that it is so far chosen and is actively fueling, the human race will extinguish all life from this planet. At least in any sense of time frame that matters. Maybe, just maybe, if this imminent reality was truly faced, and if a critical mass of consciousness was aroused, in time, we could yet alter the future. We could yet change course. We could yet salvage what's left of Earth's life support systems. I know that the truth I feel I have no choice but to deliver is not popular, and in most cases, not wanted. And I ask that you forgive me. I can only be who I am. I can't turn away from the truth. The future is yet to be determined. What will we do? Each of us has the power to wake up, to never give up in the fight for the greater good. Make your voice heard. Until Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.
You are listening to UCY.tv. Why don't you stick around for more awesome radio?